Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights. Firstly, a big thank you to you all, and just wanted to draw attention to the fact that I am at 964 subscribers as of the recording of this video, nearly at 1,000, and I just wanted to put the call out, guys. If you've been watching the videos and enjoying the content but you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you as part of the first 1,000 subscribers, and I'd love to hit that milestone by the end of the week before I go on holiday off to the Northern Rivers. Just putting that one out there. But a big thank you to all of those who have subscribed and supported the channel in the past. I'm having an absolute blast. I'm enjoying not just covering Australian politics, but now more sort of UK and across the Anglosphere. But today, just want to give an update on some polling that's come out and adjust my ongoing map as needed. So, on to business. We're going to start over on Poll Bludger by just reviewing the main sort of headline polls from the more kind of reputable and sort of credible pollsters, shall we say. So, beginning with News Poll, we've got 51 to 49. YouGov has gone the other way to Labor, so Coalition leading in News Poll, Labor leading in YouGov. Freshwater also has the Coalition with their nose in front, and the Guardian's Essential poll has them tied on 47 each with their undecided as well. So, despite the fact that Roy Morgan's bounced all the way from a 3% coalition lead all the way down to a 4.5% Labor lead in the space of a month and a half, you can see that the main headline pollsters, the ones that we sort of know and trust, they're not seeing the same sort of momentum swings and movement in terms of the headline figure of vote intention. But what they are finding is big movement on the leaders' ratings. Newspoll has Albanese +9 as preferred PM. YouGov has Albanese +6. Freshwater has Albanese +4, and these are all Albanese's gained in each one of these from the last reading. And finally, the Essential poll doesn't include a head-to-head, but Albanese is +1 on net approval and Dutton is -6 approval. So, as you can see, the leaders, we're seeing the movement, but in the headline sort of figure of Coalition versus Labor, no real change. We also have some really interesting little bits of seat polling. So I'll just scroll up here a little bit. So Freshwater was commissioned by the News Corp papers to run a poll in the 6 currently held Teal seats. Of course, North Sydney is also held by Teal, but that seat is being abolished. And what Freshwater found was a uniform, well, not a uniform, but we don't actually know. But as a block of 6 seats, there's a 5% swing against the Teal independent members, which, if it was uniform, would deliver all but 2 of them to the coalition. Interestingly, we've got a preferred Prime Minister tie here, and this field work was last Wednesday to Friday, and this post was about a week ago. So this is nearly going back 2 weeks, so keep that in mind. But the other tidbit from this poll was that we've got 42% saying, or basically backing their MP to go with Labor, and 47% saying no, which I assume means they would prefer the coalition. And then just more on Teal polling, we have this one from Sky News. This is a pollster, Salutify Research, and they're working on behalf of, I think it's Australians for Prosperity, which is basically like a liberal light outfit that is campaigning basically against Greens and Teals. It's headed up by the guy who lost his seat of Ryan to a Green. So what we can see in this poll is the majority of voters in all 5 of the canvass Teal seats here, we don't have Warringah, would support their Teal MP and candidate coming out and revealing who they would support in a minority government. So you can see it's pretty convincing there, even like big majorities, even with an unsure contingent. And what's more, when respondents were asked which party they would prefer their MP to back, it's pretty close in Wentworth, but otherwise we have 12-point lead in McKellar, we've got a 9-point lead in Kooyong, an 11-point lead in Goldstein, and a 12-point lead in Curtin, and that's even with undecided. I'm not sure why McKellar has such a low undecided contingent. There was also a third part to this poll, which I can't find in print anywhere, but I did see it on a Sky News segment where they asked respondents, who do you think your Teal candidate will back? So not who would you prefer they back, who do you actually think they would back? Now in Wentworth, there was higher unsure. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was pretty close between Liberal and Labor. People sort of on the whole weren't sure which way she'd go. But over in Goldstein, where we've got 49% of people backing the Liberal Party for their Teal independent, the respondents overwhelmingly thought that Zoe Daniel would support a Labor minority government over a Liberal. So just an interesting little tidbit there. And we also have this interesting little set of seat polls for Green-held seats, or Green target seats as well. Now it's a little bit dodgy because it was conducted for Advance Australia by Insightfully, who I'm told are not the most credible pollster, and the News Corp papers wrote out this headline, "Federal Election Wipeout for the Greens," but the results don't really suggest that at all necessarily. So firstly, in Griffith, it's suggesting that the LNP primary is going to rebound significantly, and Max Chandler Mather's margin against the Liberals is going to dive from over 10% to about 2 or 3%. In Ryan, it shows the LNP limping over the line by about 1.5%. In Brisbane, for some reason, they are considering this a LNP versus Greens battle, which the LNP would win, but the primary votes would suggest that Labor's easily going to come second and win on Green preferences, which is, of course, my contention. So an interesting one there. And we've got some small detail on the Melbourne-based seats. Adam Bant winning easily in Melbourne. In Wills, the Greens primary is up, but not enough to displace Labor. The suggestion was that the preference flows to the Greens were a little bit weaker. And then in Macnamara, the Liberals rebounding, but the Greens overtaking Labor on the 3-candidate preferred count. And on those numbers, probably closing the gap and taking the seat from Labor over the top of the Liberals. So some interesting little polling numbers there. I just wanted to discuss too some little issues and some sort of complications that have happened recently in the campaign and how that's affecting perception of the leaders. So, for example, Dutton, he is very much under pressure at the moment. His policy points are falling flat. There's no sort of cohesive policy. There's no cohesive vision. There's not even a cohesive coalition or indeed even the Liberal Party at the moment. They seem a little bit divided. I can't think of a popular coalition policy, like whether it's the nuclear policy, whether it's that little tax write-off for small business lunches, or this new one where he wants to hold a referendum to basically put the politicians in charge of who they can strip citizenship from, that sort of thing. And then, of course, there was the back to work for public servants order. None of that is really doing it for voters, whereas Albanese is looking a little bit stronger. I think he's getting a little bit of a rally around the flag effect from Trump, who is wrong-footing conservative and centre-right leaders around the world. And I think Albanese handled the cyclone relatively well, whereas obviously Dutton's been under a bit of scrutiny, not for attending that fundraiser just before the cyclone hit, and that's coming after a lot of sort of speculation about his housing portfolio and his buying and selling of stocks during the GFC, and whether or not he was privy to information about what sort of bailout packages were coming for banks when he was buying their stocks at near all-time lows, that sort of thing. So Albanese on the front foot, finally, for more or less the first time since the Voice referendum, and Dutton looking a bit weak and not really sure how he's going to claim the momentum back. But there are some potential flashpoints coming up. I don't think the cyclone's going to be an election issue, but we do have a budget next week, and it's not looking like it's going to be a particularly good one. But not only do we have a budget, but we have a budget reply speech. And this is where the coalition and Angus Taylor get their chance to actually put forward, a bold economic vision, something that undecided voters who have become frustrated with Labor, that they can rally behind, and they can see or start to get an idea of what a coalition government under Dutton actually looks like. Because so far, really all we're seeing is, well, we're not Labor. So the coalition have a chance to actually spell out their vision to the Australian people, and maybe correct the record on a few of these sort of policy brain farts that have fallen a bit flat. But we shall see, because I think voters and Liberal Party supporters have been waiting for this for a long time. But we just haven't seen the policies, we haven't seen the vision, and we haven't really seen the leadership in recent times. So without further ado, we'll jump over to my map, and yeah, I've made some changes. So thank you to the commenter who gave me some tips on how to get this thing over to the left side and make more room and change up the tabs at the top. So I've got the coalition just listed as LNP, we've got Labor, we've got the Greens. I've put the Teals in a block, and I've got the rest of the crossbench just here in grey. This I just thought would be the simplest way for me to plot it all out. I know that obviously Kata runs as a party, and so does Rebecca Sharkey as Central Alliance, but or Centre Alliance, is it? However, they're not competitive in any other seats, and they're going to be sort of lone members of the crossbench when the time comes, if we see this minority government situation. So I think this just kind of clarifies who is in what seat. But if you guys really hate it, I can always bring back the cap and the car. So what I've done with this map, you can see I've given the coalition a 1-seat lead over Labor, which, that would, I guess, with the headline polls still kind of 50-51 coalition, I guess that kind of makes sense. But I have put some lighter shading in seats where I think both parties or the Teals are vulnerable. And what I think you'd find is if we took these seats off the coalition, then suddenly they're back in the early 60s, and Labor are finding themselves at sort of 71, 72, and the picture becomes quite a lot clearer. And if we see Dutton continue to flounder and lose ground in the polls, then yeah, I'm probably going to commit to taking some of those seats off the coalition. But for now, this is what we're looking at. So going around the country a little bit, we will start in Brisbane. So Ryan, I have the coalition losing ground there. They're still ahead. We had that seat poll, of course. It's only going to take a small bounce off what was a pretty catastrophic 2022 result for them to recover that seat, and I'm still backing them to do that. But Ryan is the sort of place where Dutton's message is definitely starting to fall flat, so it's definitely not in the bag by any means. And then I've got Brisbane in light colours for Labor as well. It's never a good idea to write off a incumbent Greens MP, but I do think, for reasons I've discussed previously, that Labor are in fact in the box seat to win that seat. And then, of course, with that seat poll does sort of pay credence to that view. I think the coalition are relatively safe in Cowper and Wannon and a couple of these other seats where they're facing an independent challenger. Monash and Moore would be the others. However, I do think that if we're going to see a surprise on election night, it will be in Calais. Not that everyone will be surprised, but I think Andrew G is probably best placed to displace the coalition in that kind of seat. Hunter, I've tilted it back to the Labour Party just owing to the coalition's struggles in recent weeks. But in Bradfield, owing to that Teal seat polling where, it's showing that there's sort of an underlying preference for the Liberals as opposed to Labour in terms of minority government, which might just be enough, even with Dutton doing his best to piss off women and professional workers. It might just be enough to keep the Liberals safe in Bradfield, and it might be enough to keep Sophie Scamps awake at night in Mackellar as well, especially when coupled with that Northern Beaches rates issue, which she seemed to find herself on the wrong side of. Just scrolling down a little bit further, here in Robertson, this is a seat where it's on a similar margin to Patterson, but Patterson's a little bit more anglicised. It's a little bit more sort of trade workers, a bit more blue collar, probably not the kind of electorate which is being as turned off by some of Dutton's rhetoric. But in Robertson, I think with their popular incumbent MP, that margin might be a bit difficult to overcome in a seat that's probably slightly more diverse, a little bit more professional, a little bit more sort of on Sydney's orbit, the commuter class sort of coming into work, that sort of thing. So Robertson's definitely one to keep an eye on if Dutton continues down this path. Whereas over in Werriwa, I'm still leaving that in the coalition column. I just think there's so much baked in anger at Labor over the way life is in some of these growth corridors, where the infrastructure is just not keeping up, and the effects of heavy immigration and that sort of thing are being felt perhaps a little bit more keenly than in these eastern and northern suburbs of Sydney, for example. So I'm keeping that one Liberal by a hair just for the moment, but again, if we see the trends continue, I won't be able to continue justifying that. No change down in Tasmania. Again, I don't think Lyons is the sort of seat where Dutton's necessarily losing much ground, even when in 2022 you had ScoMo, who was seen as very much out of touch with working Australians and with women. He was able to the Liberals were able to make gains in Lyons, and while that sort of similar sort of ScoMo vibe is starting to haunt Dutton with his stock and housing portfolio and his rhetoric around working from home and that sort of thing, I don't think that's going to be a factor in Lyons. But obviously the local nature of that campaign might suit Labor, but in terms of what we're seeing nationally, I don't have enough to credit Labor with that seat just yet, I don't believe. Moving across to Melbourne, I've moved Goldstein to a slim hold for Zoe Daniel. There is a bit of talk that of the two Melbourne-based Teal seats, that Kooyong is maybe a little bit more progressive. There's more significant demographic shift that has moved that from a conservative seat to a progressive seat, whereas in Goldstein, from what I understand, it's a little bit more what they call aspirational, and perhaps the issue of Palestine with the Jewish population there might hurt Zoe Daniel a little bit too. So that one, I think, could potentially be vulnerable, especially with the state government dragging Labor's brand as well, which will have an impact given that minority government is looking more and more likely with each day that passes. However, in Chisholm, again, Dutton SINKS, this is a sort of seat similar to Robertson for different reasons, but it's the kind of seat where in order to win it, the coalition, they need that solid statewide swing in Victoria in order to carry it pretty much on margin, but they needed to demonstrate that their hawkish rhetoric on China was a thing of the past, whereas I think in actual fact Penny Wong has handled Australian-Chinese relations quite well, and I think that hasn't gone unnoticed. So I'm not necessarily predicting that those older, sort of more conservative Chinese voters are necessarily going to swing back to the coalition just off the bat. And it's a little bit more, it's not sort of working class mortgage belt, even at the more sort of outer suburban part of the seat. It's professional class, it's a little bit younger, commuters, and the issue of the suburban rail loop could potentially be at play here. If you guys saw my short, you'll know that that project is causing a little bit of angst, or more than a little bit of angst, throughout Victoria, throughout metropolitan Melbourne, and perhaps the voters of Chisholm might be starting to think that maybe it's not really going to be a reality, or even if it is, it's going to cost the state a lot of money that the state doesn't really have, and that Labor's brand in this area, which received such a boost from it in 2018 and 2022, maybe that similar sort of boost isn't really available to them this time. So for the moment, I'm keeping it as a Liberal seat, but the way Dutton's going, it's one that he could potentially end up losing. Aston, on the other hand, I know Labor won it at the by-election, but when I think back to 2022 with Alan Tudge, already embroiled in scandal, and the Liberal brand in the absolute gutter in 2022, they still held it at the general election. So I do expect, in a cycle that is going to be friendlier to them, that they should really retake that seat without too many issues. In Adelaide, I've given Sturt to Labor. With the way that the campaign's going with Dutton, I just can't justify keeping that as a Liberal seat, given the strength of the Labor brand in South Australia and the sort of voters that Dutton needs to hang on to in the southern part of the seat. And then over in WA, perhaps also owing to some of that Teal polling, I've still got the Liberals ahead in Curtin. I think they did just enough at the state level in those underlying seats to convince me that they'll be able to achieve that small swing that they need. But I have moved Tangney across for Labor because the Liberals didn't convince me at the state level that they were doing enough to move the needle there. But I have credited them with Bullwinkle, where Labor doesn't have any incumbent to defend the seat from a high tide margin that they got in 2022. So I think that just about covers it, guys. Thanks again for watching. Remember, if you haven't subscribed already, I'd love to have you on board. I'd love to get to that 1,000 mark before I go on holiday at the end of the week. And please like the video if you enjoyed it. Please comment your thoughts below. I read all of your comments and I try to respond to as many as I can. And some of the things you guys say definitely do make me double take and have a think and have a reflect on it. And I discuss it with other people, and it definitely all feeds into this evolving view I have of the upcoming election. But thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.